the 2021 budget workshop underway. Welcome. We'll try to get through today as quickly as we can. I am going to suggest that we're going to move the capital budget to the top of the agenda. Oops. And of course the live stream on my phone goes off. We'll move the budget workshop up to the top of the agenda if that's okay with everyone, just to get through it quickly. If you recall last year, by the end of the day we're pretty zonked, and it's kind of a stretch to get the capital done at the end, so we can get the capital done off the top. That'd be great. Anybody have any concerns with that? Alright, so with that, we'll try to keep things on track and maybe even get out a little early today. Thanks for giving up your Saturday, both council and staff, and I'll turn things over to CEO Derricott to start things off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. It's a privilege to be here even on a Saturday. This is obviously one of the key parts of our annual processes is the opportunity for administration to put before Council a proposal for a 2021 operating and capital budget. I always feel it is important to remind ourselves and remind Council of a few things
was just going to mention, Mike, that we are starting on page 47 in your agenda packages. That's where the capital budget is.
With that, I will turn it over to our General Manager of Corporate Services, Sarah Bittner, to start taking us through the capital budget.
Thank you, William Council. Welcome to Budget 2021. So we'll start with the capital budget. This is very similar to what we would have seen in the 5-year capital plan and strategic plan position. These projects are just the new ones for 2021. There may be some 2020s that cross over at the end of the year once we know what's happening here, but just concentrated on the new ones. So in front of you we have the different areas and the proposed projects that we have. I think we're frankly here. If you have any questions on anything, please put them forward.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, just down there on parks, asbestos inspection, what does that entail?
So that is, with our public sector accounting board standards, there's a new one coming in for sort of amalgamating into asset, what's the name? Asset retirement, part of the act that they're bringing in. And we have to have reserves set aside for contaminated sites, similar to what we do for the landfill.
Okay.
So we need to have those monies assigned for any of our buildings that may have asbestos in them for when the time comes for them to be demolished. We need to have some of that money set aside for that. So they require us to have an inspection of all our buildings to be aware of when we have that asbestos so that we can start putting some of that money aside.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. Appreciate it.
Councillor Byer.
The Chair to Administration, regarding the inspection, and wondering that's such a large dollar amount for that, and so many, if so many communities have to do this, just following everything we've had with COVID and that, what happens if a community can't afford to do that?
Go ahead. That's a loaded question.
I'm really not sure how to answer that one.
Go ahead, CO Derricott.
Through the chair to Councillor Byer. Always when we are given regulatory standards to uphold, there's varying levels of implications for not meeting those. Some of those may be a benign state of non-compliance. That's kind of the least, almost a neutral state, all the way up until significant fines and penalties, in particular for if you are to contaminate water bodies and things like that, there can be significant financial penalties. When there is a new standard such as this, there's generally some graciousness as communities implement this. I will say we've been given quite a runway for this, so I think there'll be an expectation there. There will become, for communities that don't accomplish this, I think, increased liability for not knowing and understanding the status of their facilities, as well as in the audit process, your auditor would not be able to go without noting, in the management letter, we receive every year things that are of concern, and I think that is the biggest thing that would happen, is that the auditor would have to comment that they're not meeting that public sector accounting principle. I don't think that beyond that there's any significant immediate implications. It's more of, I think, as I described, placing yourself in a place of increased liability that may obviously not be palatable. I would suggest to you that the level of cost is pretty directly related to the number and size and scope of your facilities. So the smaller municipality, the smaller the scope of their facilities, and so the financial burden, I would suspect, somewhat scales with the size and the capacity of the municipality as well.
Councillor Chenard.
I actually have two questions. The first one is Vision Park upgrade. We were planning a huge upgrade with the water this is something new, and the other one will just be carried over then, correct?
Yes,
Okay. Am I allowed a second one?
go ahead.
Okay, on capital roads recapping, we talked about First Avenue, and then we're spending 1.2. We get any information back on First Avenue, what we should do? Because I believe when we're gonna do First Avenue being the recycling depot as well as on the east end, is that reflected in here? Because 1.2 doesn't seem like a lot of money to spend on roads.
Through the chair to council, I might have to pass that one on for
Okay.
details on the 1.2.
Thank you. I'll make a comment or two, and then if Mr. Ham has anything to add to
Okay.
that, certainly will defer to him as well. So the road recapping program is independent of the First Avenue
Okay.
projects. We are undertaking currently the detailed design work
Okay.
for First Avenue in town proper, just to distinguish between First Avenue here and First Avenue on the east end. And so that 1.2 million is intended for general road maintenance like we saw in the West Haven area this year.
Okay.
Once we have a completed detailed design, we will also have with that some more firm cost estimates, and that's when we will bring that project forward for council's consideration is when we have those costs identified through the detailed design process.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Byer?
Through the chair to administration, so regarding the First Ave and on the main, in the Main Street portion, so do we expect that to come back before 2021, or could it be possibly completed in 2021, or is it something that's gonna have to be pushed further?
Through the chair, I think it's unlikely that construction would take place in 2021, but that doesn't, I think you can anticipate that a report will be brought back to council indicating the results of the detailed design, costs, et cetera, and then obviously council will have some options to consider as to how they would like to proceed, up to and including, beginning that process, assuming it can be funded appropriately. Administration would be prepared to engage that at that time.
Mr. Ham, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, that pretty much sums it up. The First Avenue project detailed design is near completion, so we'll have that information, but 2022 is looking likely for kickoff for that project.
Okay. Councillor Sorensen?
Through the chair to administration, can you explain the park, public works building roof?
Go ahead.
Again, just a few brief comments, and Mr. Ham will back me up if there's anything else specific there, or perhaps I should say Mr. Latour, building maintenance there. The roof is just in need of basically a complete rehabilitation. It has a number of significant leaks, which obviously compromise the facility, and so this is just a rehabilitation of the roof to ensure the continued integrity of the building itself. I believe, Ms. Latour can correct me if I'm wrong, that we have engaged some preliminary quotes, so we have a pretty firm idea of the potential cost there. Is that accurate?
Through the chair to council, that is correct. It's mainly leaks that have been long-standing and rehabbing the roof, and we have some preliminary quotes to move that forward.
All right, go ahead.
Through the chair, I've seen quotes for major commercial buildings in town under $50,000 for a re-roofing, so this seems extremely high. I don't know. Maybe we can.
The size of that building is quite
Yeah,
significant.
I'm talking
Yeah.
about major commercial buildings that were re-roofed for well under that number. Along the same lines, the furnace for the rental property, I can get a quote this afternoon for half that price, so that seems extremely high as well.
Through to administration, I noted that as well, the rental property furnace. Which property is that? And $13,000 for a furnace is outrageous, depending on what kind of furnace it is. Is it for a larger building or is it for a house?
Thank you, through the chair. That has been noted by myself as part of this process as well. This is for the old RCMP building, which is now housing
Okay.
the food bank. And as with all projects, the budget does not necessarily dictate the cost, and I think your comments on the furnace in particular are certainly accurate. And we will not spend more money than is necessary replacing the furnace. For
comments or concerns? Councillor Sorensen?
Through the chair to administration, can someone just briefly explain the landfill scale upgrade?
I think I would just defer that one to Mr. Ham.
Go ahead, Mr. Ham.
This one has been on the books for quite some time, as a replacement just as the scale is aging.
So it's a full replacement.
Councillor Byer?
Administration, through the degassing process, water
concern is, knowing how government projects work and how contractors work, they're going to see this in our budget at 250, and they're going to say, "Oh, well, I can be in that neighborhood." And this is also a public-facing document, so public sees a rental property furnace at 13,000. They're going to question our sanity, quite frankly. The RCMP building is a little different than what I thought would have been maybe one of our rental houses, so certainly going to cost a bit more than a typical furnace. So I think we need to be cautious of that as we approve and go through this process, especially on things like public works building roof. I would be much more comfortable having a lower amount, understanding the background that we're expecting it to be around 250, and then see what those bids come in, and then council can make a final determination when those costs come in. I just that's a lot of money for just a roof of a building. So some folks had their hands up. That's just my comments. Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Bauer.
Well, this is a question to you then here. If we do want to report back, which I do, then we just don't pass this budget, is that what happens? And then, because it's seemingly if we pass this budget, it's a done deal.
Yeah, so we can
don't pass the budget.
feedback around the table if we want to adjust this a number or if we want to remove it. That's what we can have that discussion right now. And then administration will make those adjustments before it comes back to council. That's what the process should be. Those decisions should be made during this workshop, providing that feedback. Otherwise, we're going to have to defeat line by line, and that's not a very effective way to do it. So, see what Eric is that?
I think Mayor, absolutely, yes, this is the time for council to give feedback. You're not passing a budget today, you're reviewing a budget and giving feedback. The budget that comes in front of you in early December, that's where you'll be asked to pass a budget, and when you pass that budget, then yes, you pass all that goes along with that budget, and as part of that. I would, if I may just go back a moment, Mayor, to your comment about the public nature of our budgets. That is unfortunately a reality that we have with all of our projects and all that we deal with. And so I don't think it's appropriate to single out this project and try to manipulate that dynamic as part of that. We certainly work to get information prior to the budget so that this is based on actual information. Again, I would describe this quote as a rough order of magnitude quote, plus or minus 20% at $250,000. That's $40,000 or $50,000 difference. We also typically can budget conservatively, which means we want to budget ample resources to complete a project and hope that we would come in underneath those numbers so that we don't have to continually come back to council on every multiple projects. At council's discretion, obviously, if you're uncomfortable with the project, it's at your discretion whether or not you want to proceed or at what level, and we're certainly happy to have that feedback. I would just suggest that not repairing the public works roof it's really problematic at this stage, and we would be compromising the integrity of the structure. So we're certainly happy to be responsive to council's concern, but I wouldn't administratively feel comfortable seeing that removed completely from the budget. That would be problematic. That's just for context there.
Thanks, you, Eric. And I don't think so either, but I think some adjustments need to be made. Councillor Bauer.
The Chair to Administration, I'm in favor of obviously repairing the building roof on a public works building. I am not an expert in what it would cost to replace a roof. I know it's certainly one that's not usually costs. And perhaps my colleagues around the table here have dealt with this before, but I have not. I do understand though that the transparency that we offer, a side effect of that is that this stuff is available to other people to see, and maybe quote things higher than maybe some of the private sector could possibly get. With that in mind, though, I would be in favor of possibly reducing this amount and putting it into a reserve, knowing that it may come back in order to try to offer a better bid when it comes in.
Councillor Sorensen and Councillor Schnard.
Yeah, through the chair, I'm on the same, I like that idea a lot, reducing these numbers to something, I think, more reasonable, and then adding a line item reserves for all of these capital projects. But, I would have a question. I believe the ones at the bottom are optional as funding is available.
Curry and Councillor Byram.
Going to the parks, the trail signage and the Vision Park upgrades, I just want clarity because last year we had 30,000 for trail signage and we had 200,000 for Vision Park upgrades last year too. So we're not carrying those over, so this is an additional 200,000 and additional 80,000.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, I'll make a few comments and then if Mr. Latour has something to add, be happy to have that. Yes, so the Vision Park upgrade project was always kind of proposed in this stage context. If you recall, the major portion of this year's project was for a comprehensive plan to be placed together. And council will be seeing that. I believe it's even prepared for the next committee meeting to see the very early stages of that. That this funding would be associated with actually implementing some of the key parts of that plan, drainage and a few other key elements that would help us ensure that park is, continues to provide a high level of service to our residents. With the signage there, again, this was a question I flagged and I asked as well, and so there is still quite a bit of work to do in the trail signage with what I describe as, indicator signs that are on the trail. So the trailhead signs are mostly up, but there's still quite a few of the go left, go right, kind of signs that remain there, and we're trying to obviously accomplish that in line with the trail master plan. But Guy, anything to add to that?
Not really, through the chair to council. Again, the 200,000 we got in vision budget for this year because of the disturbance of Trans Mountain coming through. Was initially getting the rehab consultation plan. What we haven't used will be carried over next year, and then the 200,000 in the 2021 budget will be to start implementing some of those repairs, specifically focusing on drainage. And we're hoping the first phase of Vision Park will be all the repairs to the diamonds that were taken out by Trans Mountain, which they hopefully will be covering the costs on. The trail signage, the 80,000 is the carryover that was in the budget for the last couple years, and it is to finish off all the rest of the trail markers on the trails, and we're just in the process of analyzing and finishing that analysis where we can put it out for quote and get the exact amounts. So it was the 80,000 that's in there, was in the 5-year plan for the signage, 30 for this year and 80 for next year. We don't anticipate using the full amount.
And if I do recall, Mr. Latour, in the Trails Master Plan, signage was like one of the top priorities of the users of the trail system.
It was identified as the number one, one of the number one concerns with our beautiful trail system is some of them are so well hidden that people didn't even know they were there, so.
Okay. Councillor Byram?
Through the chair to administration, regarding the trail signage, we've got a beautiful brand new bike park out at Wilmore Park, and I know many people are terrified of using the trails because they get lost. Is there any, does any of these funds help give a few more upgrades to signs out there? I think some of the maps are probably from the 70s out in the inner parts.
Thank you. Through the chair, no, this particular project does not contemplate Wilmore Park at that level. We're certainly, I think you've accurately described the reality out there. I know that Wilmore Park, partly because of the wonderful addition of that great bike park, is certainly becoming a higher priority in terms of adding to, enhancing, upkeeping the other amenities that are there. And so trail signage is certainly one of those that I think council can expect to hear about in the future.
Okay, Councillor Sorensen?
Through the chair to administration, I'm a little confused. Mr. Latour just said that some trails work wasn't completed in the past, and so this is carry over of that signage work. But if we approve a capital item before, it would carry forward automatically. We wouldn't see it in this column, correct?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, maybe Sarah may be able to clarify this if I don't get this right. There was initially a 30
to follow up as we're on Vision Park here, so with TMX, you're currently in discussions with them about the disturbance and how we're gonna move forward with the replacement of those diamonds.
Through the chair to council, we just got all our quotes back from our consultant doing our Vision Park plan on the actual cost of building a new diamond, and we're just literally starting the process of putting that all in a letter to get to Trans Mountain and formally request that we would prefer to rebuild them ourselves, and we would be asking for the funds to do that in lieu of them replacing the diamonds themselves.
That would give us some additional flexibility to maybe look at doing some baseball diamonds, not just slow pitch diamonds.
Through the chair of council, when we bring our plan to you in the next committee of the whole meeting, you will see that that is part of the proposal moving forward, is some hard hull diamonds in the first phase.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Schnark?
This is more of a curiosity. Public Works, the V112 van equipment, 125,000. What is that? Because we were moving to leasing. I'm just curious what this van is.
Go ahead.
Thank you through the chair. This van is used by our utilities department, and so it comes with a number of pieces of specialty equipment that allow them to do camera work in the lines and both the water sewer and a few other pieces. And so, yes, a van itself doesn't cost $125,000, but
Yeah.
the additional pieces of equipment are what brings that cost down.
And that is one of our oldest vehicles.
Yeah, that's what I was curious, because I knew the van wasn't cost. My thing was the cameras, and I do understand the importance of the old blue van running around, but it's the equipment inside.
It's got the great water droplet decals
Yes.
on the side there.
Yeah, that was just more of a curiosity thing. Thank you.
Councillor Byer?
Through the chair to administration, regarding the stormwater mitigation at 1.9 million, I believe that's reflective of the grant that we just received. Do we have a plan for what that includes? Does it include anything off of the First Ave Creek there that causes issues, or storm drainage?
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Through the chair, very brief as I can be on this. This was a wonderful surprise to us. The initial grant application actually went in way back in 2014 or 2015, and has suddenly come through. We're obviously happy about that. The scope of that initial project was quite large, going all the way north from north of Wilshire Estates, northwest there, and all the way through Bench Creek and also Wasp Creek drainage. Some of that work has been done in the meantime. The core part of this project will now be what you have heard us refer to as the Wasp Creek drainage project, and obviously we're thrilled to be able to fund that through grant money now, whereas before we did not have it. But there is some flexibility there to address a few other issues along that same drainage course, and we'll be looking to maximize that grant money to accomplish as much as we possibly can in that. The early indications from the grant advisors is that they are quite open to the flexibility as long as it generally still meets the parameters of stormwater mitigation in our community. But the Wasp Creek part of that project is our highest priority.
All right. Just to follow up through to Mr. Ham, are we going to be completing the bank stabilization work behind the pavilion this year that we were able to get our MLA's help on getting the licensing approval on?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we will be improving that. We are going to take a different approach to it as to the slope and let the creek direction kind of select its own meander on that space. So it'll have a different look, but yes, the general scope of the project will be the same.
Okay, well, now will be completed this year or next year?
It'll be completed between now and April of this year.
Okay.
Or this season.
Because I think the permit had some timelines that we had to meet, so, okay.
Yeah, just to add to that, unfortunately, the work is best done when the ground is frozen, and by the time the permitting came through, we had missed that window, and so now we're just waiting for the following season to complete it. We're looking very much forward to repairing that section of the bank. Is not only is it quite visible, but it's also one of our important community spaces that we want to make sure we protect.
Right, Counselor Byer.
Through the chair to administration, under roads and transportation, we've got engineering design standards. We've got lots of, it seems like we have lots of designs on the way. Which one does this entail for 150,000?
Thank you through the chair. So, as communities mature and grow, one of the elements that small communities normally don't have, and more sophisticated communities do, which we describe here as engineering design standards. So this is basically a document that you can give to anyone doing work in community, and if you're building this type of a gravel road, here's the road-based structure, here's the crown, the slope, the ditching, and it gives all the standards for a contractor to follow to build, construct, and access, to put in a culvert, to build a roadway, to do sidewalk, curb and gutter, water, sewer. It encompasses all of those kind of key projects and establishes critical standards that will allow for consistency, but also to ensure that work is done properly for our very, very, very unique conditions in Edson. This is changed in priority for us, particularly with in the past having in-house engineers do a lot of our work. This wasn't as important because they engineered them all themselves and were aware of all our unique conditions. Having changed a little bit away from that dynamic, we feel that this would become a more critical piece to have in place, so that when we're working with other engineering consultants or contractors, that we've established those pieces. Mr. Ham, anything to add to that?
No, you said way more than I would have.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Sorensen.
Through the chair to administration, I am in full support of that kind of pre-planning and being ready for growth when it happens. I think this is a really important piece. And just clarify, this is to complete the design document.
That'd be a document that we would have in place, yes.
All right, Counselor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, does any of this include the west end there, with the work that's being done there with consultants now?
Go ahead.
Thank you through the chair. The engineering design standards are not referenced to any specific project. They're a guide that could be applied to any and all projects that take place in the community. So it's not responsive to or considerate of any current or specific project.
Any other questions? All right, I think we batted this around the bush enough. I was a little surprised nobody brought this up. 40th Street, 6th Ave to 748 design. What the heck is that about?
Thank you, Mr. Han.
This would support the multiplex by widening the roadway of 40th Street from 748 to 6th Avenue. Additionally, there's a water loop suggested by our model that would assist the multiplex at that point as well. So it just includes those two pieces.
Okay. Any other questions? Counselor Wilkinson.
Just one more, when you say that we're committed to the highway changes here on the bottom, I mean, that was like the wastewater treatment plant, right, that Councillor Boyce used to keep reminding us, we're committed to that, we're committed. What's the time frame?
They have not really given us a time frame. Sometime in the next few years,
Thank you.
right?
So there's two elements to the time frame. You'll have to forgive me, I don't remember the very specifics for each of these, but my recollection is 2022, 2023 is the time to place on it, and they must also be funded by the provincial government, and I think that's honestly the bigger variable, is until the provincial government, because we're only paying a portion of these processes and the government's paying the rest, and as everyone knows right now, there's not a lot of money to go around, and for relatively minor highway infrastructure adjustments, I would suggest I don't expect to see these funded in the next 5 years. That I want to be very clear, that's just how I see the lay of the land there. But the purpose of setting aside this money in this way is so that if the government was to surprise, we're going to do this next year, that we're prepared to fund our commitment to those projects. But I would be surprised if it's even in the next term of council, to be quite honest.
I still do support a reserve part because
That's the way it is addressed, yes.
And that way it doesn't get forgotten about and as things
That's right.
transpire. So. All right, so before we move on to the capital budget, I guess we need clarity on the Public Works building roof project, just to see where council's at.
If I may, Your Worship, I think we've obviously heard that council has a few questions about a few of those projects, notably the roof of the public workshop and the rental property furnace. If you will allow administration to just take those numbers back, and we can see if we can refine them and we can bring those forward for additional consideration, we would be very happy to do so.
That sounds acceptable to me and council. Okay. All right, Councillor Byer.
Through the chair to administration, that Wilshire Pond dredge, I know we have money in that reserve for it. How often does that have to be done?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, dredging of stormwater management facilities is condition-based rather than time-based, and so it's a little bit difficult to give a specific time. It has to do with conditions and flow and all manner of things. You typically don't have to do that more than every 10 years. That's a very rough number, but it can be either sped up or delayed based on a number of variables and conditions. But we do feel, just to keep in mind that those ponds in places like Hillendale, south of the hospital, Wilshire, are actually stormwater facilities, and keeping them in good working order is critically important to ensuring the appropriate drainage of our community, which has been a stressor on our community the last couple of years. And so we do want to make sure we effectively maintain those spaces.
The Poplar Place storm channel, is that from Skyview to Poplar Place, or is that from Wilshire to behind Poplar Place?
So there are two things happening. Again, I'll ask Mr. Ham to correct me wrong. There is a north to south drainage course behind Wilshire that we are undertaking operationally currently to assist with some changing flows that a number of factors have been a part of that to ensure that that water moves well. And then there is also the Poplar Place channel, which is the east to west drainage coming from Skyview towards that Wilshire pond to ensure that that obviously functions properly. Mr. Ham?
That's pretty much sums it up.
Okay, I just heard concerns from area residents that kids like to use that area to walk to school from that area. Is there going to be a sidewalk or a space for kids to walk once this project is complete? Like, what is that project going to look like? Because there is no connectivity from Skyview safely down towards 13th Avenue in the school areas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would suggest that our first priority there is effective stormwater management, but we can and will consider that connectivity piece there, and are open to how we might facilitate that. I suspect that once the project is complete, that it will continue to be informal access at minimum, as it has been in the past, and we may even be able to look at ways to enhance that.
I just want to keep that in your back of your minds, because I don't want to end up in a situation where we have more kids walking on 63rd Street, because anybody that spends time in that area knows it's quite dangerous. So, Mr. Ham?
I'll just quickly add if you were to refer to the connector between Skyview and Poplar Place there, that is part of our consideration for that space. We have discovered that there's a living issue there first that we need to handle before we can consider putting in a hospital.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byer?
Through the chair to administration, last year we had put $100,000 into the wastewater treatment plant performance assessment, and my notes say that's regulatory requirement that the plant is meeting the discharge requirements. Is that the same this year? Is that the same amount?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll defer to Mr. Ham.
This was part of our 5-year capital plan, so the first year performance assessment would have been the $100,000 that we spent in 2020, and then the continuation in 2021 would be the second portion of the performance assessment. This will also add additional aspects of capital spending going forward because it will prove and disprove pieces of the wastewater treatment plant.
Councillor Byer?
So follow up on that. Is there going to be another? Is this going to be
This is the project that keeps on giving.
Yes, very much. Ridiculous.
Thank you, Mayor. The important part here is that it's a highly sophisticated piece of equipment, and we want it operating at its optimal, and that's why we spend the time and the money assuring this.
How much did the sewer lagoons cost us? How much did the sewer lagoons cost us
To operate?
to operate? This is just provincial government baloney to me. But
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'll leave that to your discretion to comment on that. I would just suggest.
yeah, it's sort of my frustration is because like this just never ends.
No, we appreciate that. Certainly, we are only just following what our regulatory requirements are, and this has we've always known this has always been a part of the completion of this project, and so I just want to make sure that part is known. And we're looking forward to having the assessment completed. Our hope and anticipation is that the facility will, as existed, will obviously prove that it is functioning as needed, and there will be limited other inputs. But that's the purpose of the assessment, to ensure that.
All right, Councillor Curry.
Just to follow up to that though, it does say that that's coming from a grant. What grant is that? And last year was it from a grant too?
Thank you through the chair. I will defer to Ms. Bittner to comment on the specific grant there.
Through the chair to Councillor Curry, we're anticipating using the gas tax fund for that. Gas tax fund to run this assessment.
I think that, projects such as that, I think are so critically important to the operation of municipality. Unfortunately, they're not visible to the general public. And when you look at the history of the lagoon system, which never caused us any issues, we're into this thing with all the additional and the building of that facility. It's probably $20 million now. And the cost just keeps adding up, and taxpayers end up paying for it. And I always question why, when we had a system that didn't seem to be causing any issues. Not that to say we should always do the right thing by the environment, but that has to be balanced by the actual costs of those things. So we will move on. I think we've batted around capital enough, and you'll bring back some details on some of those issues that we have problems with in the future, and we'll take a 10-minute recess. All right. So we got the live stream going there, Steve. Thank you. I think we fixed the mic issues, so hopefully those watching online will have a little bit more enjoyable experience. How can you not with this great group of folks?
Tens of fans out there.
Yeah. We might actually have some youth counselors watching this morning, so they all been given the link. So we want to get into the operating side, and we'll try to keep things as tight as we can. Councillor Byer?
Through the chair to administration, something I just thought of at the break was our invoicing that we have on our utility bills right now include the sewer and the water, and is a reflection of the cost that it is to run those facilities. If the capital projects that we have for the performance assessments on the wastewater treatment plant are necessary to run the facility, and this is something that will go on into maybe past the next couple of years, I think that, to be honest with our taxpayers, that it's something that maybe should be reflected on the tax bill rather than a capital, or sorry, not the tax bill, sorry, yes, so the utility bill, rather than something in our capital budget. So if that were to continue, I would appreciate maybe having that conversation.
Yeah, thank you through the chair to Councillor Byer. Absolutely, we administratively have been moving and have recommended to council on a number of occasions that our utility billing do a better job of encapsulating full cost accounting, not just cost recovery, full cost accounting, including capital investment, replacement, and that type of thing. In our various areas, sewer is the one that is currently doing the best job of getting in closest to full cost recovery. right now in the capital sense, we recover some monies to address ongoing infrastructure project, as well as replacement cost, or I should say depreciation cost of the existing facility, so that at the end of its useful life there will have been generated an amount of money to replace that facility. In direct relation to Councillor Byron's comments, what I would say is, after the assessment, if there is significant continued requirements, either operationally or capital, I think at that point we would absolutely be recommending consideration of how that may impact the utility costs for operating our sewer system, pending the results of that assessment.
All right, thank you.
If I may also just add, Mayor, just before we jump into operating, we just want to take a quick look at the capital reserves as part of the capital discussion. This is really at this point more of an informational piece. This is if council was to pass the budget as proposed at this point, you can see the beginning and end balances of our capital reserves for 2021. And unless Sarah has something specific to answer, I think we would just be happy to answer any questions, but this is really more just to reflect the the transactional pieces that go along with the various capital proposals.
I think just one item I would mention looking at this is at this time assuming the revenue sharing is staying at the same amount for 2021. So that's showing as going into the reserves. If it was to change, then the amount would change, etc.
We won't have an answer on that for a little while yet.
So
So.
I'm just assuming the status quo.
Yeah. Councillor Byron.
Through the chair to administration, I thought the the revenue sharing that we received from Yellowhead County, we get it for the following year, so wouldn't we already know the money for 2020 that we get that we use for 2021, is that right?
Through the chair to Councillor Byer, I believe the agreement's actually expiring at the end of this year, so it needs to be renegotiated for 2021. Is that correct?
Remember, this is 2021 funding amounts.
Yeah.
So, so this money would be going in next year if we have that agreement. So this is going into reserve for next year,
Entirely.
right? So.
So we've reflected that, as has been our practice, we've reflected the majority, in this case, all of the revenue sharing going directly to a reserve, so that if that program is discontinued, the only thing that it will affect is that reserve balance at the end of 2021.
Yeah. So the 2020 funds are for 2021 projects that are listed here, and then on the other side, the transfers in, that's the questionable part, right? If
Okay.
we're actually going to have money going into that reserve.
Okay.
Councillor Sorensen.
Through the chair to administration, the asset management plan must recommend reserves for each of these capital areas, wouldn't it?
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering how do we evaluate this last column,
Thank
if it's a
you.
good number?
Through the chair, I have a few comments on that. The asset management plan does not specifically speak to our reserve categories, as those are arbitrary, we just create them. But the asset management plan does score us on a financial capacity sense, and it is largely reflective of the reserve capabilities that we have generated, but it's not just specific to reserves. So as we do a better job of building, maintaining, and using reserves to rehabilitate our infrastructure, that obviously will be reflected positively in the asset management plan. And the other thing that I would add to that is, I think a thing that I know Councillor Sorensen in particular, you've mentioned many times, and that we are in the early stages of the process of developing a reserve policy. I think that's more where we would see guiding principles and targets associated with specific reserves based on asset categories and obligations that come along with that. So it's more likely that you'll see that type of thing in a policy that you'll see in 2021.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm sure I've asked this every single budget workshop. What can we use the Public Reserve Trust for? What's that money for? Where did it come from? And what's it set aside for?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. The Public Reserve Trust is monies that have been set aside, and they're actually in a separate bank account as required, not our general bank account, for monies that have been given to us in lieu of municipal reserve and developments. so they give money that goes into that specific account, and we have to keep it as a separate reserve as well. It can be used for new green spaces.
New.
Yes.
So,
There's a list of
There's
things
a
that are
list,
included.
there is a list of things, but the.
Generally, so public utility lots, green spaces, school sites, there's a number of things that are on that list, but it's relation to the portion of development that is taken to accommodate the public requirements that the community may have. You can give either land or money. If you give money, this is the account it goes, and then it can be used for those types of pieces in the future, but they have to, as Ms. Bittner suggested, they have to be new. They can't be used for maintenance or capital upgrades on existing pieces. So in the future, if we grow so much that we need another elementary school site or something like that, this may be part of that process.
so we can't use it for our neighborhood parks plan.
No, unfortunately not.
Through the chair, can we use it at the multiplex anywhere?
Possibly. I would say in that case, mostly in terms of development of public utilities. Stormwater drainage and,
Right.
yeah.
Or maybe the outdoor rink.
Possibly.
Maybe the outdoor rink, yeah.
But we are certainly, yes, you want to use this money as effectively, but also as appropriately as possible.
All right. Anything else? All right, we'll move on to the operating budget.
Okay, thank you. So when we move into the operating budget, before we kind of move into the departmental reviews, you'll have seen in your package that there's some higher order principles that obviously were kind of the foundational pieces for the creation of the budget. So we're going to start with those kind of higher order principles because those contexts obviously influence what comes after it. And I think I'll just turn it over to Sarah to start leading us through that.
Certainly. So looking at the operating budget that's being presented today, it is being compared to the 2020 original budget and not the emergency budget. So sort of keep that in mind as we're going through those comparisons. As you'll see, we'll do our usual inflation update, the salaries and wages breakdown, and then go into the departmental presentations. One item was to just mention, when we had the operating base budget at 3.33 on the sheets, that was actually an error. It's 3.56. So we always have a base budget, which is the budget that would keep the exact same service delivery as in, well, usually it was the year before. It's going to be 2019 this time. And then the other one is with any of the optional items that have been brought forward today. So with normal base budget is a 3.56, and with the optional it's a 3.73. So moving on, we have the I actually hand this over to Mr. Passy to run through the MPI and explain that.
So as we have discussed in previous budget workshops, the difference between CPI and MPI. CPI is the consumer price index, and so your goods and housing and what consumers buy at a personal level. The MPI is the municipal price index, and is the inflationary costs according to what municipalities purchase. The MPI that we've been using to kind of base things off of is the City of Edmonton. They have a team of economists that are able to forecast this out. Unfortunately, we don't have that complement of staff to be able to do that, but we're able to piggyback off of their work and to kind of get an idea of where things are going, where things are forecasted. So you'll see, if we look back on the last 5 years, that the inflationary amount has been about 10.32%, and with the proposed budgets that we've brought forward, the total for Edson tax increase was with the updated 3.56 is 10.36, and with the optional one, the 10.53. So we can see that we are catching up to that inflationary amount and getting a little bit past what they're at. But there's been discussion in the past about whether those costs, how accurate that MPI is for Edson as we are further out, costs more to get goods out here, there's additional fuel costs, things like that. So based on the MPI that the city has put out and the proposed tax increases, we can see we're fairly in line with MPI. Yes, so any questions?
We'll move on.
Right, so with the salaries and wages, I always tend to look at these as a whole rather than departmental wise, just to give you an overall view of the changes from year to year. So this one reflects the, as I say, the original 2020. For the salaries area, it reflects the increases set out in our out-of-scope compensation policy, as well as the municipal energy coordinator position. So we have a grant-funded position that is with us for a year or two. So that salary is also included in here, but we do have a grant offset. I think it's about 80,000 in 2021 for that. And then the wages one is there was a collective agreement of a 2.25% increase from the collective agreement for unionised staff for 2021. So that's just showing you those overall changes there.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, through the chair. You're indicating yes for QP at 2.25, but can you just refresh me, what have they had for the last 3 years?
2020, well, this is a good one. 2020, I think, was 2019 was a 1%.
Zero.
What was the first year of the agreement? Can you remember?
Zero.
Zero.
Okay, it was 0 and then
Zero.
1, and then we're at 2.25, and then it's 2.5 for the next year after that.
Right, so they really didn't have very much in 2 years prior to this. Now, with management, what percentage rate did their wages go up in that same period of time?
I don't have that from the beginning. I have the amount from last year, but as I said, one of those is funded from a grant. So what was that when that came off? It was 3.8, I think it was, something like that. I don't have it, sorry, for that same period of time. I don't have that information in front of me.
An estimation at all?
I honestly don't. I wouldn't like to hazard a guess. I can definitely get that information for you.
Okay, I'd like to get that back, yeah, please, thank you.
Councillor Chouinard.
Just going through all the percentages and stuff, so we're gonna confuse you. Okay, I think I figured it out. So overall, with our increases for 2021, it's a total overall change of 279,000 would be the increase against our budget for wages, benefits, all of the above. Is that correct?
That's
Yes.
correct. For just salaries and wages.
Right,
Yes.
that's exactly, because I was looking at the 4 and confusing myself, but now I got it straight. So it's 279, so part of our tax increase for next year would the equivalent of like a 2.9% increase in taxes just to pay what our wages, like we were talked earlier about the cost of living, and 1% is equivalent to just over 100,000. So if we did a tax increase of 3.7, we could fairly say part of our tax increase for 2021 would be to pay the extra cost of salary and wages.
Some of it will be extra cost of salary, but there's also in here an amount for a new position that's completely grant funded that does not impact taxes.
Okay, but I'm just looking at these numbers of 279, so that would be our final number, or how much is from the grant
Yeah,
subtracted
so
from that?
to take you through the chair, if I may add, there's a couple of things here. One is, yes, any increase in salary wages is typically funded through taxation, but not completely. There's obviously, it's a much more complicated scenario
Right.
with that, as some of these service areas are also in revenue generating positions.
Correct, yeah.
And so it's not necessarily directly linear. What it is saying here is that there will be an increased expenditure
Correct, yeah.
of $280,000 on salaries and wages. The mayor already suggested one area, 80,000 of that $270,000 is covered by a grant. So it's
200,
yeah. We also have a municipal intern position. There's other pieces there that aren't necessarily tax funded. So I just would caution you making that direct comparison.
Right.
And the other thing is some of these positions, depending where they are at, are also cost shared with revenue, with Yellowhead County, so that also impacts how that impacts our taxation amount. So
Thank
it's
you.
really hard to get that direct comparison.
So really all we're trying to show here is the changing of the overall expenditure, but this is not necessarily a direct reflection to the taxation.
Okay, thank you.
Bless you. Any other questions? Okay, moving on.
Before I move on from the salaries and wages, if you recall, over the last few years, I had been sort of trialing a different way of doing the budgeting for the wages through looking at the last few years' actuals and doing an average of those and using that as the wages for each separate area. After 3 years, I admit that has not worked. The budgets and the actuals have just been out a little bit too much. So for 2021, I've come up with a more, what's the good word for it?
Workable?
Workable might be a good word, way of doing the wages budgets. So when you go through each individual department, you're going to see probably a lot of changes in that personnel line, but overall, it's just, this is the change overall. So just keep that in mind as you go through. You might see a big change in a certain department, but it may just be in that personnel line, and it's just the way that we have decided to reallocate those wage budgets to make it more reflective of what's actually happening in those departments, because my little pilot program there did not work.
Yeah, so just to add to that, basically what this means is that we are just hard coding salaried wages to different departments rather than relying on trend-based data, which was just not as functional as we would have liked it to have been. And so, anticipating a utility operator and working in both the sewer and the water, there's now just a percentage of those wages have been, okay, it's 50% water, 50%, it's not that number, but the concept of that, just putting it in there. So we're looking forward to that being a much more stable reflection of the process, and we're continuing to gather data that will help us refine that moving forward.
Councillor Sorensen?
Through the chair to council, I just want to point out, I just did the math, and I might be wrong, but if you take the $80,000 grant out, the 3.12 goes down to 2.2, so it's quite in line with the collective agreement.
Thank you.
All right.
No other questions?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. Right, so this year, with this 2021 budget, we do have the added, I guess, wrinkle of the emergency budget that is there coming for 2020. So as I said probably twice now, so we've written everything onto the original 2020 budget. So the proposed increase from the 2020 original budget is 3.73, but the proposed increase from the emergency budget to the 2021 budget is 10.07%. So just sort of letting you be aware of that actual change that happened. Now, when we did the emergency budget in April, May, there were items included in that were non-COVID related. So, for example, if there hadn't been COVID happening, these would have been brought back to you in that spring budget for adjustment. So just letting you be aware that there is $232,000 that is included in the change from the 2020 original to the 2021 original. And so that can be a little bit confusing, but if COVID hadn't happened, these would have come back in the spring, and there would have been an extra $232,000 that we would have asked for taxation on. But because we had the emergency, they all kind of merged into one. So as I'll show you on a different slide as we go through, we've actually listed those in a separate column for you, called the non-COVID adjustments, so that we can see those differences that have occurred. Oh, sorry, any questions on that? Okay, I'll get my question.
Councillor Sorensen and then Councillor Byer.
Through the chair to administration, is it fair to say then that of the 3.56% this year, about 2% of that was actually due to last year's
That's-
numbers?
Yeah, and if I just may, maybe add just a little bit of precision to Sarah's remarks there, that this is $230,000 that we would have had to deal with some way. And we would have been coming back to council and saying, we have an additional $232,000 worth of expense. It's not necessarily that it would have gone to taxation. That ultimately would have been council's decision. But these were just pieces that had to be dealt with and that were dealt with through the COVID emergency budget. And so now it's accurate to say, as you described, encapsulated in that 3.5, 3.7, whichever number you prefer to use, is that $230,000, which is equivalent of a 2% tax increase.
And it's interesting to know most of that is due to decreased fine revenue. So when people talk about not wanting photo radar, that's translates directly onto your tax bills. So
Some people change their minds. $230,000 is a mind change.
But yeah, if I may, Your Worship, I want to add one more piece to that. When we positioned ourselves through the COVID emergency budget, you will recall that council's kind of key priority there was flexibility in the future to move forward, and we articulated administratively as clearly as we could that any reduction in tax is going to require a rebound or a recouping effect down the road, and so that's as of the previous direction. This was what council suggested: is yes, we recognize that, and that we know that there's going to be a return to that, and so currently we're reflecting that as that change from the emergency budget to the proposed budget of approximately a 10%, but that is in line with what was discussed as we went through the emergency budget. That is obviously still discretionary to council as we move forward, but we just wanted to highlight that.
Councillor Byer.
Through the chair to administration, I recognize that the town is a big, you guys have a lot of expenses. I was noticing the increase in electricity costs, just from one year to the next. Is $75,000 a normal increase from year to year?
Yeah, thank you. So this is I believe not almost, it is completely in relation to the street lights. And so when we went through the transition from the low sodium bulbs to the LEDs, we made some budgetary adjustments that proved to be, at least initially appear to be inaccurate. We're actually doing some work to find out what that may be, as in, did the electricity cost just not reduce as much as we anticipated? And so we made an adjustment in our budget that may have been too aggressive, and or we just are verifying with Fortis that the rates are accurate, and et cetera, et cetera. What we think at this stage, again, we're still only exploring this, is that we reduced it too aggressively, including things like distribution and fixed costs as part of that reduction, rather than just making the reduction on the actual charge of the electricity. And so we're just, unfortunately, we're inaccurate in how we reflected that and had to respond. But we still have some work to do to verify that.
I do know that rates, the cap on the rates was removed, and as you see in your residential rates, your power bills are significantly higher than you've experienced the last couple of years. So
there's definitely a number of variables in play there.
Okay. Anything else?
So I talked about the MOST grant. The MOST grant stands for
Municipal Operating Supplemental Transfer.
It's gotta
Excellent
be a
job.
cool acronym. That's the most important part of any program.
Mike, you can have a donut.
So yes, as we know, announced this month, the town of Edson was allocated approximately $850,000 to deal with expenses due to COVID or loss of revenues due to COVID. So as we say, this will be used to address shortfalls in 2020, but 190 is being used in this 2021 budget that we're presenting today. Without the use of that, the 3.73 would be 5.42. So that's
I don't want to.
no, jump in. Any
Yeah, no, I don't want to steal Sarah's thunder. There's a connection here as well to, we're going to talk in a few minutes, you may have already noticed it as you reviewed your package, a direct relation in this to the tax stabilization fund as well, and so hopefully in a moment you'll see how those processes are connected as well.
I'll say thank you to the provincial government for once, so.
So yeah, I thought we put in about the asset management plan again. The one that we adopted did recommend the increase in utility revenues for water and sewer by 2.2% and 4.4% respectively annually for the next 20 years. We did start this last year. This budget reflects that continuation for this year as well. We have included them in the optional section because it can be something that it doesn't affect the base budget, but those amounts that we create go directly to those reserves to help for the future of those of assets, water reserve and sewer reserve. The plan does recommend adding a 2.2 to the overall tax increase to deal with all the other areas of our infrastructure deficit, I suppose. This budget doesn't address this directly. We feel that there was still some other focuses that we needed to move things out of general taxation, which we'll talk about on the next page. So with the rate increases that we're looking at for the utility bills, we've also had an adjustment for the operational increase as well. It's not just the AMP, it's the actual operational increase as well to keep water and sewer more cost recovery. Sewer is very much online now for cost recovery. Water has a little bit of work to do on that. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the 2020 rate is listed there for the water, the sewer, the waste collection and the recycling. The operational increase to those rates is in the next column there. We've also made waste collection user pays, which we've done in the past, and also the recycling as well. The AMP, the asset management plan increase, at the moment only affects the water and sewer, so that 2.2 and the 4.4 and 0.03 and 0.07 respectively to water and sewer. So the 2021 rate is in the column that's obviously labelled 2021. But the average, and then we have the average annual increase based on 20 cubic metres. So the two lines at the bottom, if you go to the very far right, shows you the annual increase to a bill. So for residential, their annual increase would be $69, and for non-res, their annual increase would be $76.
Says about $5.75 a month for a residential utility customer on average. Councillor Sorensen, you had your hand up?
Yes, through the chair to administration, how close are we to cost recovery on the recycling side?
On the recycling, sorry, through the chair to Councillor Sorensen, with this budget we are at cost recovery for that for the new recycling contract.
Great, thank you.
Yes, yes.
Any other questions, comments? Just a thought, and I've heard this from some residents that, this is reflective of the low cost of producing water in our community compared to other communities, but we're a little abnormal in that our sewer costs are higher than our water costs. In most municipalities, your sewer is less than your water, and knowing that we are behind on cost recovery on water, would now be the time to look at maybe having the same rate for both in order to bridge that gap. And what would that be if we went to a $1.38 charge for water? What would that be for an average consumer per month? I didn't work out those numbers.
You want to check that?
Yeah, so if I, thank you, Mayor. Certainly, I would suggest that we definitely still have room to when we say that these are full cost recovery currently, that's referring to the operational side of things. So any additional monies that we would recruit through utilities, I would just suggest it needs to be allocated to the reserve to deal with future infrastructure rehabilitation. And if any increase at this point, we would suggest that would be the case. And so that's certainly something administration would be happy to support and have no issue with that. We just wouldn't want to see that become a revenue generation that offsets taxation. As you'll see, we still have water revenue challenges in that space. I mean, just looking here at the math, we're talking about 17 cents per cubic meter at 20 cubic meters. I don't know if we can do the math really quickly on that, maybe at lunch or something like that, and bring back a specific number. But it would be a few dollars a year kind of thing.
I'm just throwing that out there 'cause the infrastructure costs in water and sewer are huge, and we have huge gaps in our asset management plan. Or do we look at increasing water lower? I know there's some rationale behind those rates, but that gap between sewer and water seems to be increasing, and when people look at their bills, it looks a little odd to them, especially if they're comparing it to some of their families in other communities.
Thank you, Mary. It is absolutely a unique dynamic and very typical for it to be reduced. In particular, a lot of communities are still on their lagoon-operated sewer systems, but have water treatment plants, and so it's just the opposite dynamic at play there. My recommendation would be for council is if they were to make any significant adjustment to utility bill, it would be consideration of a fee for stormwater management. A $2 flat fee or a $4 flat fee or a $5 flat fee, that would help us manage both the operational elements of dealing with stormwater management, but also addressing capital needs. It answers the same bigger picture question. That's just more the specific nature of it. That's where I think we see the biggest gap in our utility funding currently at the moment from an operational sense. And there's it's becoming increasingly more common for stormwater management to be considered a utility rather than funded through taxation. So I would just place that out for consideration.
And these are just thinking thoughts that this is probably not the best year to do something like that, but once again, government buildings, churches, all those things that don't pay taxes contribute to utility costs, and that is far more effective way of dealing with it. And it's not based on property assessments, so it's actually based on usage, which is always preferable, which is the way council has been going. Councillor Sorensen?
Through the chair to council, I would be in favor of standardizing the water and sewer number to one common number, or going with the utilization of the stormwater fee. I think both of those are good ideas, and you should if those did happen, it should increase the overall tax number because we're moving things into the utility side.
Decreasing the tax number.
So may I suggest if we were to do this, we could certainly review this, come back with a number, what a per dollar fee would generate for revenue of stormwater management, and what percentage of that we might recommend go to operations and what percentage we might suggest go to capital. Anything that was identified to go to operations could offset taxation because those costs are currently being incurred and funded through taxation. And so it could be a blended approach to addressing some of the operational pressures we feel, but also preparing and positioning us better to deal with the long-term effects of stormwater management. We've talked about this lots. We obviously are expecting stormwater management issues to be an increasing pressure on our community, and so that may be a proactive measure to try and get us a little bit ahead of that.
Councillor Schmidt?
I'm not against the idea, but I'd hold off. We have to let the public have a break because we've been adding in these increases, and yes, I agree it's user, but we should monitor it for some time to see if the numbers are correct. Like we have the $14, whatever it is. I don't get a regular bill, so I'm just randomly numbers. We get so much for the lagoon, so much for recycling. the waste collections, if people are looking at their bills now, we should run it for a while to make sure those numbers are correct, because I agree with the comments, our water's enormously low, but our sewer's high, and it's like Mike said, some towns are opposite. They have to clean the water, but I would, we should monitor what we've been doing and see if it makes sense. Because if we just keep adding in ones, that's what's making the public going, yes, my tax bill went down, but my utility costs have skyrocketed, and they always refer us to the power companies. We're not like the power companies, so that's just my comment on it.
When's our waste collection contract up for renewal? We want to look at lowering costs because that's a huge one. Councilor Sorensen.
That is user pay. That is user pay.
I just want to clarify, I'm not recommending we increase the burden on our taxpayers. I'm just recommending moving some fees from the taxation side into the utility side.
Yeah.
So I just want to be very clear.
If I may add to that, I think that's was my impression, Councillor Sorensen, of your remark. And just to clarify to Councillor Chenard, so stormwater management costs are already being incurred. So we're not saving the residents any money. We're just discussing what's the most effective way to generate the revenue associated with operating those systems. And in so many ways, getting it onto the utility bills is a so much more effective way of generating that revenue for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is the mayor suggested is there's far fewer exempt properties from utilities than there is from property taxes. It's much more transparent. It's much easier accounted, and I think we always want to try to reflect to our ratepayers and our utility payers the cost of what they're actually receiving, and utilities is just a much better model for that.
Councilor Curry?
Yeah, I would just like to say that, or to see that, and I'd be in full support of that. We've been working really hard to get our utilities into utilities, not taxation. And just doing the quick math on that for everyone, it would be to like equal them out at that 0.07 would be $360 extra per year. So even, I would like to first of all just see what it would look like to put that stormwater into utilities first, what that would look like as a price, but then also that idea of that $2 flat rate or something for stormwater.
We'll do a little work of that. Even over lunch, we can crunch a few numbers and bring that back.
Yeah. And to echo what Councillor Chenard said too, I don't necessarily think this is the year to do this, but it's worth having the discussion and seeing what that would look like. Maybe it is more effective. Maybe that is something we want to do this year, but we need to have that discussion before we can make those determinations. So we'll move along.
Talk about tax stabilisation. So there are still some areas within our budget that use reserves to offset or even operations to offset. So in the 2020 budget, we had used an amount from the tax stabilisation reserve, about 340 in the original 2020 budget. That is not in this budget, and that we've kind of switched that 190 from the most grant to instead of using tax stabilisation. That's really a reserve that we should look at the end of the year. If we end up with a deficit, it's something that we can look at to offset that rather than actually put it into the budget to start with. The other area is the revenue sharing. We still have that 220 that offsets policing. That's another thing that we're wishing to remove from the budgetary process over time. Might be faster than we think, but we'll have to look at that.
Just general comment, I would like to see that happen this year because I don't know what's going to happen next year. So
To clarify, the revenue sharing money that we would allocate for this is money that we have already received.
Okay.
So we're, the principle, I think you suggested, Mayor, yes, we agree with that, but I just wanted to clarify that we're not relying on money that we received in 2021.
Fair enough.
I'll actually jump over the medical centre. We'll talk about the water utility operations. This is still actually offsetting general taxation to the tune of about $280,000 in this budget. That's another one that we're trying to slowly would be moving those out to reserves rather than having them offsetting taxation over time as well. And as we do with the Fortis franchise fee, that goes strictly to a reserve. We'd like to also do that with the ATCO one. Again, another one that would have to be done over time to move them out. Now with the medical centre rent, that's also one that was offsetting general taxation. If you remember, we were slowly moving those out to reserves to take away our reliance on that money for general taxation. So as you said, we've removed the tax stabilisation reserve, and we're going to be keeping that for if anything happens at year end, that we have a deficit. This was also done with the 190, but also by pausing the reserve transfers coming from the medical centre. We started that originally first because it was sort of it felt like an imminent thing that was going to disappear very, very quickly. We've now signed a 5-year lease with the doctors for that building. So for this year it has been removed, but then we will start taking it back out over the next 4 years with the 2022 budget. So by the end of that lease, we would have removed that reliance on that rent for general taxation. So the urgency of that, I guess, has lifted a little bit. So we've been able to sort of make that happen at a later stage rather than at the stage that we have now. And then, as I say, that we'll be looking at all of these and coming up with plans to slowly move them out from taxation to reserves.
For example, if council was to decide to make an adjustment to the water rates, Sarah, it's not going to impact this the way I was about to say, but that money would just go straight into a reserve.
And we'd still have that 280 if we did that.
But we would like to go further in the future to reduce that $280,000 coming from water slowly over time being into a reserve rather than subsidizing taxation. And as we consider these items, we want to consider them in terms of their their stability. So we're not really worried about the actual franchise fee because that is a very steady, stable source of revenue. So it's not ideal in our opinion to have it impacting taxation, but it's also not a large risk. And then we, so where the medical center used to be at the top of that list, we've moved it down. Revenue sharing may move up that list, because of its uncertainty as part of that. And then I would suggest water would be the next under that, and so on as we move forward to reduce that. Theoretically, over how the number of processes this takes, I think when we're talking about adding the percentage for the A&P and those types of things, that's where we would start by reducing these things. Ultimately, that does result in revenue reserve transfers rather than that piece. So still a lot of work to do there. We've made a lot of progress, but there's still some pieces.
Go ahead.
Through the chair to administration, if we did start tackling that 2.2 asset management number, would it just be like an asset management operational reserve? What would you call it? Where would we put money into?
Yeah, I think right now we would just, we can obviously identify it in a more refined way, but generally speaking, we would put it into our infrastructure reserve and or various reserves associated with elements of our asset management plan. Yeah.
Well, I think that comes down to, I think we need to have a discussion, should our reserves actually reflect the categories in our asset management plan? Is that a better way of doing it? Because I am a little concerned that, we're putting money on from the water and sewer into infrastructure, and then we're spending it all on roads. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. And also, we've talked about this since I've been here the last 3 years, and we have done some work. But it's also one of those things you're like, well, we'll just put it off. We don't have to do it this year. We don't have to do it this year. 10 years from now, we could be in the same situation. So should we be looking at a 5-year implementation plan where we say, all these numbers added up, is that this amount of money? Over 5 years, we need to do a 2% to make that adjustment. Is that maybe a more fair way to do it? Because I'm always concerned as a politician sitting around this table, I really don't want to do anything this year because I don't want to burden our taxpayers anymore. But these are unstable revenue sources, and this is not the right way of, operating our municipality. And the more we wait, the longer it goes on, and then we're just pushing that problem down the road, which we've talked about several times.
So one of the strategies that I think council might employ is starting small. I mean, it seems, but even if you were to say, we're gonna do 0.25% this year, then you're gonna do another 2.5 next year, that's 0.5%, and after 4 years you're at 1%, and pretty soon that adds up to some pretty significant, and so how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time, and when you look at it, in the big picture, it can be quite daunting, but I do think even making small steps in that direction will, I think, gain momentum and quickly over time start to add up and culminate in a at 0.25% a year, for example, for 10 years. Now you're talking about 4%. Now you're talking about $500,000 a year, which eliminates most of this issue. And don't try and solve it in 1 year. I mean, I think that is the right mindset and the right approach. This is an issue that has evolved over many years, and so it doesn't make sense to have a plan to eliminate it in 1 year. I think our plan needs to be multi-staged for sure.
Councillor Barr?
Through the chair to CO Derek Houghton and administration and council. In a previous role I had, when I was trying to encourage people to save for retirement, that was exactly the strategy that I used, was that you start at $25 a month, or 0.25%, and then you increase that over time. Because just taxing on a 2% increase is just not affordable, and as the mayor suggested, it just never will be. We'll be here 10 years down the road with the same conversation. I would be supportive of having a greater detail of that conversation.
Yeah, and there's always, if I may add to that, there's always the challenge in this nature of describing value for tax dollars to residents, right? So every 4% tax increase is not the same, right? If a 4% tax increase in community X is just, reliant on reserves and other things just to keep their operations going, versus a 4% tax increase in the next community over, but a lot of their capital needs are being addressed, and the asset management plan is being addressed, and so you can see that they're not equivalent. And so the challenge is communicating that to the taxpayers, to say our 4% tax rate is actually better than that community's 2.5% tax rate. is just, we know that's a really, really difficult, challenging thing to do. But there's a lot of truth to that, and we certainly administratively are taking the approach of what is the right 20-year plan and 25-year plan and those types of things. But we recognize the challenges that are inherent in council's role and council's position of interacting with and articulating that to the people that ultimately decide who sits here and makes those decisions. But I'm certainly an advocate of doing something. Doing something is better than doing nothing. And even if it's a small thing, what I think you're also doing is enshrining the philosophy of addressing these issues rather than passing them down the road. And that will begin to also gain momentum. And you're also training yourselves, future councils, and the public that this is the right thing to do, and that gets easier over time as well.
So this year we're not doing anything though, right? That's my concern.
No,
about. I think we're actually taking a step backwards with the medical
I wouldn't describe
side.
it that way.
No?
We have removed in this budget the entirety of reliance on the tax stabilization
That's right,
fund,
okay.
which I think is actually a really critically important step. And putting that on the back end instead of the front end is really, really, really important. But I would also suggest that is basically offset by the most grant, which is not something that can be done over time. And so slowly, we have to have a plan for reducing how that impacts what we're doing as well. We haven't, I think we've, like I said, I think we've made great progress in this. But part of the issue is, in any given year, it may seem very, very small, but it's got to be considered as a cumulative process.
Councillor Sorensen and Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair to administration, I just wanted to kind of comment on what the mayor said a few minutes ago, that the fear is you make a significant change and then it just gets dumped into infrastructure reserve and gets lost, because that could later be spent on potholes or who knows what. So I would love to see that further divided up if possible into some key areas that we can then we can see what we really have in reserve for some of these massive infrastructure assets.
If I may add to that, so again, I think this is reflective of the reserve policy that we have been discussing. I think it is a critically important piece. I think it will make decision-making better and easier, both for administration and for council. We have discussed administratively this exact same concern of this money being generated by our water and sewer system, and it goes into the infrastructure reserve, but the infrastructure reserve gets used for all kinds of things. That's not necessarily bad, but it's easy to be unconscious of that when you're making future decisions. If we were to go back and look at our reserves, you'll see that we have absolutely refined our reserves over the last 4 or 5 years to better reflect the areas that they serve, and there's just a little bit more work to do there for sure.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I'd like to see us starting on that medical center, not relying on it starting this year, not putting it off to start next year on, just already put that into reserve. And then with road maintenance, when do we see a plan for road maintenance, a continued plan, and where are reserves going to be used? Because if you're really talking to taxpayers, that definitely is their major concern. When they're paying taxes, roads are the biggest issue as far as what I hear.
Go ahead.
Certainly, I think that's a quite big conversation, and so I'll just comment on it briefly. But we'll take that back and do some work on it. But generally speaking, that's reflective of the 5-year capital plan, and currently, $1.2 million a year over the entirety of the 5-year capital plan is an investment that we weren't previously making in our condition of our roadways. This is all just to simply say that yes, we collectively, administratively, and council have acknowledged that there is input needed into the condition of our roadway, and that plan is in place. There's refinement coming as we have more significant data in terms of the where those investments go to best maximize the value there as well. But we are actively engaged in a specific and targeted plan to better deal with the challenges of our road infrastructure.
All right, we'll move on.
So if I just may make
Sure.
one comment here. At this stage, and Sarah and Mike may correct me if I'm wrong, I would suggest that any the very, very initial thing we need to be cautious of is this money that has been allocated from the most grant is now the money that we probably need to reduce if at all possible. And so if council was to say something like, oh, we'd like to include a 0.25 to address this, I would suggest that we would reduce that implication of that most grant first, and then work from there into these other areas. But I just wanted that context. And Sarah, Mike, anything to add to that? Or appropriate? Yeah, good. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I think ready to move on?
So I'm a little confused. So the most grants, so we reduce that, but that's money coming from the province, right? So where would that money be used if we don't have it as a part of the budget for 2021?
The most grant?
Yeah.
It's currently allocated to the remainder to a reserve.
Oh, the remainder to the reserve, and how much is that?
Well, total is 850,000, and there's currently 190,000. So there's 650-ish remaining allocated to a reserve for future consideration. Obviously, subsidizing operations with that is you run out of it, and then what do you do after that? And so our objective is that over the next few budget cycles, that $190,000 would be reduced to zero. One way to do that is whatever amount, so if it's 190 this year, then 150, then 100, and so on, is that most grant can be used to sustain that process to the point where we close that gap. That's one potential outcome that we can consider.
Okay, so my brain's missing a piece here because that most grant has to be used by the end of next year, right?
Well, the expenditures associated with the grant Most of them are in the past for us already.
Okay.
So,
So the money the most is covering for those expenditures are going into the reserve.
but in terms of satisfying Mike, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here. This is more art than science right now because it's a brand new, obviously, concept is, once we've satisfied the grant in terms of the applicable expenses being undertaken, that money is now freed for us to expend it as we see fit. If it's going to be expended in direct relation to a program or service in relation to dealing with COVID, then the deadline for that is March 31st of next year. The way that we have applied for the grant, almost all of our expenditures have already taken place, which means that $850,000 is now freed up for us to do whatever we want with, if I can just be so blunt, but.
So my head's at that all needs to go into a reserve. And that's what you've done?
650,000 in the reserve, 200,000 currently subsidizing this year's operational budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And that's
now I understand.
So partly what I'm suggesting is before that $600,000 was expended, we would want to reduce that $190,000. So next year, if it was 150, we'd be down to 450, 500, and so on, so that we have a little time and space to reduce that without actually impacting the taxpayers is one potential use for that. It's not the only use.
Go ahead, Guy.
Okay.
Can I add something? Sure. That in this year's coming budget, we are projecting some revenue losses at Repsol and the pool for due to COVID, and that 190,000, 200,000 that we have in the budget this year directly offsets that. So if the following year we're out of that and we're back to our normal revenues, then that buffers that amount that'll impact the following year.
Thank you.
All right, probably made it more confusing to everybody, but all right, thank you.
Sorry.
No, I probably did by asking the question.
It was the mayor.
Thank you, and this is all just important in the context of when we get to the end of this and we select a tax rate, these are the things that we have to make sure we're considerate of as we do this. Administration is obviously, and in council, we all have a shared genuine interest in just doing the best with the overall dynamic we have in front of us, and these are just puzzle pieces we wanted council to know. I think what you'll find is now the departmental stuff is always pretty straightforward, right? It's these big picture concepts, I think, that are a little bit hard to grasp because, as Guy suggested, there's just multiple variables that impact each of these pieces. I just also want to suggest that compared to many municipalities of who we would consider in our cohort, I think we are ahead of the curve in how we're talking about and how we're addressing these issues. And I think we should feel good about the fact that many of these things exist in our cousins' budgets, but they're currently veiled, right? They're just, I don't mean that in a disingenuous way, they're just not talked about. They're there. They have other issues that they're dealing with that the fact that we're at a point where we're talking about this is a really good sign for our progression and our future health. A credit to the work administration's done, but I honestly have to give most of the credit in this to council because these are tough things at a council level to engage and deal with, and council has been fully supportive of us engaging them. Even if we haven't made the amount of progress we'd like to have, at least we're engaging them, and that's important as well.
All right. We'll move along. We're running out of time. Supposed to be out of here by noon, right?
I think I honestly think you'll find that it starts to flow a lot better.
Don't say it out loud.
Yeah, no.
Do we need a
I'm
break?
willing to put it out there.
Do we need a break?
No.
Okay, we're going to continue on. If you need to go use the facilities, you can step out for a second, but we'll continue on here. So.
Okay. So the next sheet shows the net taxation impact, sort of a summary of all of the sheets that we're about to be looking at. I'll go over the columns just so that we're again aware of them. So the first column was the original 2020 budget, Then those non-COVID adjustments, we've sort of separated those out. And other budget adjustments, the growth in inflation, they're a little bit intermingling really. It's to do with, if we have agreements we've signed where the costs are going up, etc., things like that. To get to the 2021 base budget, and then we actually have nothing in the service changes column this year, and then just the other column, there's a $20,000 one there, which we'll get to when we get to that department. So overall, you can see from the 2020 budget, nicely balanced to zero there. Those non-COVID adjustments we saw earlier, 232,000. Other budget adjustments, 201. The other ones actually have reduced that down a little bit to then become to a base budget of the 401,000, and that is the 3.56 that was mentioned earlier. The 20,000 from the other, it brings it to 421, which is the 3.73 that was mentioned earlier. There's just a quick breakdown and summary of what you're about to see.
Yes, Councillor Sorensen.
Through the chair to administration, I just love this table. I don't remember seeing it previously.
You have not seen it in this way.
This is awesome.
This is an important way for us to show, in particular, those non-COVID adjustments, those previous year's adjustments that have been married in there. And Mike and Sarah wrestled with this. How do we show this appropriately? And I think they have effectively displayed this here.
So we'll talk about some of these line items when we're in
Yes,
the department.
yes.
Yeah.
Summary of what
This
you're
is
about to
obviously,
see. Yeah.
this is filled by the departmental numbers. This is just the overall review.
Councillor Wilkinson?
No, I didn't
Oh,
have my hand up.
okay.
I can think of something.
I think something else I haven't mentioned yet is the, usually I will tell you, like a 1% taxation gets us about $110,000. So when you're talking about, adding 50, you're taking 50 off, those sorts of things with the medical centre rent, for example, that's sort of the addition that would go on. It's percentage net. Okay. All right, so we'll go into the different areas. So start with the taxation area here. There's this slight change in franchise fees.
Councillor Curry, you're chairing for a second.
Wasn't really a lot to see. I think the most important thing is that down in the transfers from reserves, you can see we've removed the tax stabilisation and put the 190 in from the most grant. So you can see that we've removed that reliance on their tax stabilisation. Any questions on this page?
I'll just one very brief note. You'll just notice that the requisitions are the same as they were in last year. All that just means is that they're an in and out. Whatever they are, we take in, and so they don't affect taxation. But these numbers will obviously be impacted by the requisitions set by both Evergreens and the province.
Questions? Moving on to legislative. That's you guys. So there's very little impact here. We have added a few extra costs there for the upcoming election in 2021, and then there was just the honorary change. And in the original budget, I think we just put a blanket amount in there to cover your honoraria. We hadn't actually had the discussion yet, so now this brings it up to the agreement that was made for the policy for your compensation.
Any questions?
For executive office, really the only changes here were there's some increases in accordance with a compensation approved by council for the executive office staff.
Questions, anyone? As you can see, I'm a better chair.
Look at the progress we're making here.
I'm in the room.
This thing that Mr. Passy sent out was quite good. So if you have this to go with it, so we know what we're going to be talking about. For human resources, not much change here really. We did have a project that was done in 2020 that is obviously not going to be done in 2021. There's a slight increase to the contracted services for the new payroll system, which was the project that we were doing in 2020, so.
Councillor Breyer?
Through the chair to administration, can you just go over that one more time? Because last year we approved a software or something to upgrade the payroll system. Can you just reiterate in a little bit more detail what you just said?
Sure. With the payroll system that we have now, currently, it's all done in-house. There is some I'm trying to think of words. We do have some issues where if there are people on holiday, how do we get the payroll done, this type of thing. With this new payroll system, it's actually done out of house. The information's sent to them, and they do our entire payroll system for us. So we don't have to worry about any of those issues that arise. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Mike, about that system?
No, simply the budgeted amount previously, so the main costs have been incorporated into this, both in terms of the initial setup, which is undertaken now, and then the future maintenance fees of that system are included in this budget.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, if we have payroll done out of system now, does that mean we have less personnel here then?
Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. No, we currently aren't contemplating a reduction in service or staffing levels there. There are still, payroll was only a partial function of the person's responsibility, as well as there are still payroll things that we have to do, benefits administration and other elements that are part of that. What we do hope to see two things. One is increased resiliency, as in if that person is away on holidays or ill, payroll still functions completely normally without them in a much smoother way. But also there will be a slight increase in capacity for them to help with some other human resource functions,
Sure.
and so
If
that's our
this is all
intention.
out of house,
Yeah, so
yeah.
that's our intention, is to translate that to some
Some
other
saving.
other projects
Yeah.
and that type of thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on human resources?
Moving on. Admin.
Okay, so from the admin area, a lot of this is actually to do with the personnel changes that we've made. And there's also a slight loss of rental revenue from the fire hall house that's no longer being rented out. And then just some very small adjustments as we went through our other expenses for administration.
So through to administration, so that house is currently vacant for our other side project that we hope to complete?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there any capital investment that we're gonna have to make into that building?
It depends.
Or is it functional already?
Yeah, so generally speaking, it's functional. Depending on the specific nature, there may be some minor adjustments, but it is habitable.
Okay. Any questions? Councillor Breyer?
Through the chair to administration, what were the personnel expenses that you mentioned were increased? What is that for the new position? The grant position?
The chair to Councillor Bye. That's for the reallocation of the wages that I was talking about earlier.
Okay,
to
okay,
with
I see.
the new
Okay.
type of budgeting. You'll also see under the gross recoveries there's some changes. That's also to do with the allocation of wages and the way that we're redoing some of our budgeting for that.
Councillor Sorensen?
Through the church administration, I'm sorry, maybe I missed it. What is the $20,000 option?
Oh, thank you. Yes, this is where the $20,000 optional piece is here. We're actually wishing to update our budgeting software. At the moment, we just use Excel spreadsheets, and there's some very, very good budgeting software out there that we would like to investigate. We've been out and had a look at some of the costs of that. The 32.5 includes the implementation of that, so we're using a reserve for the 12,500 for that, but the 20,000 would be an ongoing expense for the use of that budgeting software.
So hope to gain some increased functionality in
Yes.
terms of user interface, accessibility, report generation. It just allows for some more sophisticated processes to be taken, better data collection and tracking that we hope will enhance some of our processes. Managers at the operational level will have a number of improved data points that will help guide their decision making and inputs. And then also in terms of creating and generating a budget for council, there's a whole piece there that will we think improve those processes.
So a $20 million organization's using Excel for budgeting right now?
That's correct.
Well, you guys must be Excel experts. Could we do some training sessions?
That's impressive.
That is very impressive. Councillor Sorensen.
Through the chair to administration, I'm just worried, like I know we have software for accounting, so you're gonna create, I'm just worried about creating a budgetary software system that you're gonna have to re-enter all of that again into the accounting side.
Yeah, we through the chair, that's a process we have to do every year anyway. We have to enter it into our accounting software, and so it wouldn't duplicate that process.
Your accounting software doesn't have any budgeting
Through the chair to
functionality?
Councillor Sorensen, they do interface together.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So there are ways that we can bring that over from the budgeting software directly into our financial software. We don't have to re-enter everything.
Yeah, so this is not an uncommon thing. Most organizations our size are using some form of a budgetary support software in addition to their accounting software.
I'm in support because I'm shocked that we're doing this by Excel. So I thought you had some sort of funky software that actually
So
pumped this
Sarah
out for you.
feels a
So
lot of stress during budget
I can only
not the
imagine.
least of which is if these spreadsheets go, then
Yeah.
there's our entire database is out the window, and so they make an input and the formulas go screwy, and it's quite the thing. They've done a very good job, a very competent job, and I think we can improve those processes. Ultimately, why does this matter to the taxpayers? Better data, better decision making, better presentation to council, better reporting. All of those we think can improve the efficiencies, and it doesn't take very much on a $24 million operation budget to gain $20,000 in efficiencies there.
I'm imagining you're going to save a lot of time too.
That's correct.
Well, exactly. If you lose it all and have to redo it on Excel, good luck.
Yeah, so one of the other things I would add to that is we've experienced, as Sarah has transitioned into a general manager role where she's not the one necessarily, so when she was the one doing all the spreadsheets, it was fine because she knew how every sheet connected, how they all went together and where you put what to accomplish what thing. But then you transition that off to someone who is bright and capable like Mike, but still he just doesn't know. He didn't build, he's not intimately familiar. In the future, in a budgetary software sense, when you make those transitions, it's not reliant on individuals' organic knowledge to make that transition. But anyway, those are just some of the benefits that exist there.
And my only comment, I'm sure you've already done this, you've communicated with other municipalities to what they're using to see what works and what doesn't work. So I hate for you to get something that's going to be a dud.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we've talked with a lot of our counterparts around here with what they're using. Lots of them are using, there's a variety of budgeting software out there that is good for municipalities. So we will be going for quotes on these just to make sure we get the best value for the taxpayer as well.
I feel bad. I should have brought you a copy of Quicken or something. All right. Moving on. Any other questions?
Communications. There's very little change here. We just did some reallocation of wages and salaries within there. That's why that's looks like it's gone up a lot, but that's just the reallocation again. And just we had 20,000 in 2020 to do some videos. We're keeping 3,000 to continue with those into the future. So you can see the 20 coming out from the reserve, but we only removed 17 of the cost. that's really the only increase there for communications.
Any questions? This is Sorensen, there you go.
On the big table, it looked like communications was going up by like doubling.
Yes. It is in the way it's reflected in the budget, but you'll see that that is, in the past, wages were allocated all under the umbrella of admin, and so we've tried to move those costs that are associated directly with communications into communications. So it looks, those costs were already there, they were just reflected in a different part of the budget, so it doesn't end up being an actual increase in cost. And you'll notice in IT, basically the exact
Basically
same
the exact same
dynamic
thing.
there.
Yes.
Otherwise very, I think, almost no minor changes there.
Just starting a reserve for some IT stuff. So we're starting small, like we talked about.
Right, yeah.
That's very
Those
small for
things
IT.
will,
Yeah.
will build up.
Giles must be super excited.
Eat that elephant one bite at a time.
Okay.
Okay. This is the area where we look after the medical centre and the doctor's house. So this is where you see the that revenue coming in from the medical centre and the doctor's house lease. Really, the main change here is for this year the removal of those transfers to reserves with the medical centre rent that we talked about earlier.
Is the doctor's house occupied currently?
We currently have a lease with AAHS
Oh, yeah,
for
that's right.
both
Upstairs?
suites.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
So that'll be a consistent revenue source, we're not gonna have to worry about that? Okay. Any other questions? Moving on, now pound.
So as we move into these other areas that are now the responsibility of the other general managers, they'll join us here at the table for kind of specific questions that council may have. So a hot seat, if you want to so choose to refer to it that way.
Let's not.
There wasn't really a lot of change here from the pound. We did have a $3,000 grant that was going to an organisation that was looking after the pound for us, but they no longer be able to do that for us, so that was removed from the expenses.
What's the change in personnel? We never had personnel at the pound per se.
And I think that's one of the issues we were facing was one of the reasons that we have decided to try this other way of doing the budgeting is putting, say for example, roads is always a good one to use for an example, I think. Because roads people may also work on water breaks or sewer breaks or help at the pound or those types of things. So the managers, when looking at their budgets, could never really marry the two together. Do I have room for overtime this weekend, for example? I'm just throwing things out there. So basically our manager now has their entire staff's budget for their wages under their budget. But we still want to reflect some of those costs that are within the other areas. So for example, the pound is a good one to show this. Under the gross recovery, went back and looked at some historical costs for that, and then putting a fixed amount to the pound. So $40,000 for cover the wages of the people that work at the pound, but not doing it hour by hour like that, but basing it on an historical look at what was spent at that time. So that means that the actual personnel line will have the manager's full staff complement of budget there, and then we just do a gross recovery between different departments to reflect those costs.
All right, thank you, Councillor Wilkinson.
To the chair, when you see, as you're saying, the cost to put in the $40,000, and then we were offering just such a little bit to the group that was helping with it, is that one of the reasons that they stopped? Or could that amount go up? Like, it just seems very small amount.
I have to,
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I have a few comments on the pound, and obviously if Mr. Ham has something to add there. So that amount was just a small amount to cover weekends,
Right,
is what they
exactly.
were doing for us. At some point, the cost then becomes more than it would cost to do it ourselves, and then that defeats the purpose of including the other organization. And so there's that principle, but that is not what happened here. It was just purely, they were struggling to get the volunteers
Right.
required to cover the time. I think as far as we're concerned, the situation was fine for our end,
Right.
but unfortunately they couldn't meet their commitments, as part of that was the bigger issue.
How unfortunate.
Just as a note here, the animal pound is not something that has been really consciously dug into in a long, long time. And so in 2021, I think council can expect to hear some ideas, thoughts, feedbacks on how we enhance both the service level of animal control, including the pound in the community, but also deal with it in a more financially responsible way. So there's some big picture issues that this budget doesn't contemplate, but will be brought to council's attention in the next year. Mitch, anything to add to that?
I just have a follow-up on that. Like, I do think with COVID, everyone seemed to go out and get a dog or a pet of some sort. And once it's over, I think that we really could be very busy at the pound, as people find their pets too much of a nuisance.
Possibly. We are not an animal shelter, to
No,
be clear.
exactly.
So,
Uh-huh.
but there is that potential.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Ham.
To actually touch on that, I agree completely. That's why we are going to be diving into this and having a better understanding of how this is going to work going forward, because currently we're just covering it with current employees, and we have bylaws that suggest that we need rabies shots for every employee that goes into the pound. So there's several variables involved.
And the facility itself isn't really conducive to COVID safety, as we have people that have to go right through the building to access the pound. And I know in the wintertime there's issues sometimes with freeze-ups and that sort of thing too, so.
Yeah, and revenue generation, right? Like should it be a user pay system? Should taxation cover the cost of animal control? Those are all elements that council will see next year brought forward for consideration. As of right now, we're basically recommending a status quo budgetary wise.
I just see a potential for huge loss.
Is there cost sharing with the county? Is that what the 24/6 is?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Good with that? Thank you.
so reading the next page. As far as the sort of up to the base budget, it's just really there was some of the wage reallocations. We also last year under the contracted services and materials goods we had some amounts in there for overhead door repairs, items like that. You'll see down they were covered by reserve. They're being removed from reserve, so the corresponding expenses being removed as well. Over in the other column here actually has a net taxation. There's no effect on the taxation, but there's just a request to move 60,000 up into the leasing instead of going to the reserve, so we can actually lease more equipment that way.
What equipment would that be?
Mr. Ham?
So the equipment that would be under the umbrella of the leasing program would be heavy equipment that we would consider tandems, graders, our snow removal equipment, these types of equipment. So we've separated out our capital costs as being automobiles, pickup trucks, and those types of things, and the lease program is the heavy equipment piece. And so this would, as a part of our leasing plan that has 8-year turnover on each piece of equipment, this would be our overall cost per year for
So with this 60,000, would that be for any new equipment, or is it?
So the two pieces of equipment that we would be beginning leases this year were the new back truck and the new sander. And this would, the increase in $60,000 would adjust the budgetary line to match up with what our lease plan looks like over the next 8 years.
Okay. Any other questions? So we have a new vac truck?
It should be here anytime.
Okay, I thought I seen the old one still kicking around. So,
It was due in October before COVID.
okay. All right, no other questions? Easy peasy. We'll move on to roads, our favorite topic.
Yeah.
So for roads, the main one here is that increased cost for the electricity that we were mentioning earlier for the streetlights. That's really the main change for roads.
Questions, comments, concerns? On roads, the road, oh, so go ahead, Councilor Barr.
No, you can go ahead.
The road assessment survey was completed this year. How did that work out? And how is that going to impact our roads budget?
The road assessment survey was done. We should be expecting our full software update and information for December. And then we'll be able to use that information in terms of making the best possible case scenario turnout for our 15 to 20 year plan for our roads and structures.
If I may add, it mostly impacts capital expenditures, but it does direct some maintenance level pieces. We anticipate, I think, that would be captured in our general maintenance budget. It's more just directing the best places to, repair catch basins, et cetera, versus replace them, or, work that we're already doing will just be more intelligent and more effective.
Okay. Councillor Barr?
Through the chair to administration. So this road portion of the budget in the operating budget is then in addition to the capital budget of the 1.2 million for the road recapping. So
That's correct.
it's, I suppose we're spending $3.2 million on roads.
In
every
a
year.
total sense, yes.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
All right, any other questions? So just a question on crack sealing. Do we do the entire town each year, or do we focus on specific areas? Because I know I drive around and I see some streets that don't look like they were done this year, and they have some cracking going on. So just wondering what that looks like, and is line painting in here and some of those things that we may have removed? Are those going to be addressed, and do we need additional funds because we've missed a year to catch up on those sorts of issues?
Pitch?
So the way that we have electively looked at the budget line for roads is we have crack sealing and other repair methodologies, including filling potholes that take place in the town each year, and we have to divide that money up, the budget up, allocated, depending on what council prefers to focus on. Crack sealing has not been a focus for the town for a few years now. Because of the budget adjustments coming from the emergency COVID budget, we didn't think it was necessary to, or a very good idea to add the additional budget line in for crack sealing and spray patching and those pieces, but we do agree that we do need to work towards those.
All right, can I continue on with my thread here?
Well, it's just backfilling. Summer students were doing it last year.
Yeah, we didn't have summer students in the roads department this year. I'd be in support of increasing the road budget this year. Crack sealing is such an important preventative feature, especially with water penetration and that sort of thing. Because the longer we go with not dealing with these things, the more our roads will deteriorate, and we have to start tackling this stuff, and doing the same old just does not work for me when it comes to our road systems. So I'd be in support of adding another $100,000 to start addressing these I'm a little disappointed that we haven't been doing that because we have some fairly, when I say fairly new, it's probably 10, 15-year-old pavement that that isn't getting maintained the way it probably should be because we don't have the monies available. Or maybe it's a staffing issue, I don't know if we use contracted services for that or not, but I think we need to do a better job in this area to save ourselves for some of those more major capital costs down the road. Go ahead, Mr. Ham.
If I might add, with the performances or the road assessment will give us some guidance on which treatments to be using going forward, and it might be a good idea to reflect on that information before we make the budget adjustment and be able to correctly allocate the funding and come back possibly in the spring, but also in the fall for the 22 budget with an actual road plan that would reflect the information that we've gathered.
Okay, Councillor Sorensen.
I completely would agree with the mayor, and we should have a fixed number, line item, I think, for annual crack sealing and maintenance. So, I understand waiting for December to see the results from the survey might be useful, but as long as you're confident you can find the money in January, then I could proceed.
Okay, Councillor Bevan.
I'm also in support of the more money, but I noticed that on our potholes, we seem to be doing the same potholes year after year after year after year. Is there any way of a better way of doing it, or people need to be better trained on how to to repair these potholes that they will last for a longer time? And I just look at when we do some road maintenance here and the people cut them out and put a patch in there, that thing stands up for the next 5 to 10 years and saves a lot of money. I think, we waste a lot of our time. We're going back every year doing the same potholes. They just keep getting bigger and bigger. An example is if you go through some of the drive-throughs here, which is not ours, but you see they tried to put cement in and they put rock in and they done this, and every year it's gotten from a 10-inch one, now it's 30 inches and it's 40 inches. And I find that our potholes are doing the same thing, that they are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon we're gonna have to do the whole road as a rehab project in that. So I don't know if it's that they don't get the proper training to do this, or maybe we gotta start looking at cutting it out and doing a better job properly like the companies do around our town and that.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, if I may. Yeah, so I think that this is reflective of what Mr. Ham suggested, is there's a number of different treatments you can do on roads with varying costs and implications. What our staff typically do on their own are very temporary, cold mix filling of potholes. Those are not intended to, they're just not going to last multiple seasons. In particular, with our weather and moisture conditions and those types of things. I think that the data, the reason the road assessment piece is so important is because we don't want to be cutting out and patching in a more permanent sense, as you're describing, roads that may be scheduled for significant rehabilitation in the near future, and so we can better apply the appropriate repair to a certain section of road when that piece of information is in place. And certainly it is our intention to use that data to that effect.
I'll just add one more thing as well. In 2020, we tried a new pothole filling treatment. It's epoxy based, and so we're hoping to get some feedback on that over the winter as well.
Go ahead.
Follow up. Just on a lot of our roads, our streets are going off onto the Highway 16. Every year there's a lot of them that are all busted up year after year after year. Example, 7-Eleven, where it goes on the highway. That has been going on for the last 10 years. Then you go across it down there by the provincial building too, and that seems like every time we come onto our highway or wherever, and that those are getting all busted up every year after year. And we do patch them, but before the year is up, comes springtime or whatever, after they're all busted up again. We're repairing them, and they're just getting in worse and worse shape. So I think we've got to, I agree with you. We've got to do something for sure.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I would say
But that's not
We've
part of
taken- yeah,
a
we've
big
taken-
road.
Yeah, we've taken a completely different approach to road maintenance here. We're just starting to implement and see those approaches, and I think you will see a difference in how we address problem areas that have existed and continue to exist for a long period of time. But we're gonna do it in a data-driven sense and use the road assessment surveys to drive that. So the intent being that every dollar we put into road maintenance, we want it to be as effective as
sure.
possible. And there's both, short, midterm, and long-term treatments that we consider when we're evaluating that.
Councillor Barr, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
I did, yes. Through the chair to administration. So I realize that we're talking about the operational budget and we have the capital budget with the road recapping. With the road assessment that was being done, does that, so for the 2021 road recapping, do we already have the streets set out? What's going to happen with that? Or are we using the information that you're gathering from the report to make that decision after it's completed?
That's correct, yeah. So our intention would be to make determinations on the specific areas that would be treated with the data that we'll have through the road assessment survey.
Anyone?
A follow-up. So through that, then, is there still an opportunity for in 2021 to have more crack sealing done based on what the findings are in the report that we'll receive in December?
I'm sure there would be, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair. So you're not going to fix anything now then until you get that report in January? Is that what you're saying?
No, thank you, through the chair. No, that's not at all what we're saying. We're just saying that the method of addressing any particular pothole may vary based on the data that we get from this survey, up to and including the sometimes if we know a road is scheduled to be replaced, repaved, rehabilitated a year from now, we'll use a very temporary, short-term repair.
Okay, but you will use something temporary, like just on this road up here?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other further questions, comments, or concerns? I do notice driving through some other municipalities where there's lots of stopping and starting, that they're starting to actually use cement for those areas. So for your consideration on that's delving into operational things, but some of these areas, like by Independent and by 7-Eleven, like we need to get this addressed. It's not acceptable, and if we need to find the money, then we need to find the money. But these are areas that are high traffic areas that we just can't continue to let them go on for another 5 years like this. So.
Yeah, thank you. And we're very, I know that our roads group, as Mr. Ham suggested already, is very open to changing the methods and exploring other alternatives in terms of both seeking cost effectiveness, but also, if pavement isn't doing the trick in a certain area and gets busted up every single year, maybe we need to consider other alternatives, concrete or others. Obviously, those will all come with research and cost implications and all those types of things, but administratively, we're certainly very, very open to finding the right solution, not just the quick and easy one.
And I know the weather has played a big part of it the last couple of years to really cause these concerns probably a little bit more aggressively, but thanks for that. I'm sure we'll have further discussions.
I'll just quickly add to the fact that Lost Creek repair is going to be happening along the First Ave right of way will improve Second Ave in terms of the base layer and moisture content, and then we'll actually be able to tackle some of those concerns without having to worry about what's underneath. We are moving in the right direction.
I understand you have a hydrology report for that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Moving on, airport.
For airport, there wasn't really a lot of change from the 2020 budget.
Questions, comments? Councillor Byer?
Yeah, through the chair to administration, wasn't it just this past year that we increased the fees in the airport for the rentals? Is that reflective?
It is reflective.
Somewhere?
It is reflected in the is that in the inflation column? Is that what those are? Yeah. Okay. So in the inflation column, they've put some of those increases there.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair,
No.
with COVID then, is the airport used much less?
Mr. Ham?
The majority of our usage is with forestry, and that was unchanged, but yes, we did see some decrease in charters.
Do we have a place for the stairs?
Yeah, you still have to say.
Exactly, and they said-
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah, okay. Concern I raised last year, I'll raise it again. I am concerned we don't have an airport reserve. At one point, that runway is gonna have to be replaced at several $1,000,000. And, to hit the town of Edson with X amount of dollars and Yellowhead County at X amount of dollars all at once is gonna be problematic, so I would, like, to be quite frank with you, I'd like to see that budget line, stay the same at 138 like last year and put the overage into a reserve, starting small pieces. For that purpose, this is cost shared with Yellowhead County, and having a reserve set aside will alleviate some of those pressures for both municipalities. It's very concerning that we have nothing set aside specifically for the airport as a strategic transportation asset. Councillor Wilkinson?
Just to the mayor, I totally agree with you. I think the terminal will have to be changed too.
Yeah.
For international flights soon.
International flights.
We had high hopes at one time. that
We
it
don't
would
want the
be
Americans landing
a
here.
clean airport, and it still may be, you know, things are going to boom.
Air Force One.
No thanks. Too important.
Anybody else? Engineering.
Oh, sorry.
Mayor?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Byer.
Through the chair to administration, by purchasing a new de-icing equipment in the capital budget, you were saying that and as I recall from previous meetings, the expense of the materials for that de-icing is pretty expensive. Are we expecting to see a savings in that de-icing column materials?
Conceptually, yes, that would be a savings in de-icing material. I think that our manager at the airport would like to reallocate some of that towards some other pieces, but that remains to be seen if we're going to see the savings
Okay.
immediately.
Yeah, I think I would also add to that is we want to experience the
savings first. Okay.
first, and then
Right.
there may be future
Okay.
adjustments that come along
Fair
with
enough.
that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Also not sure about, equipment delivery time and.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it may end up only being available for a very small part of 2021.
Right. Okay.
All right, moving on. Engineering, no questions. We'll move on to water.
Engineering here, there's a few sort of large amounts. The other revenues there, that's where we have the offsetting grant for the salary of the municipal energy coordinator that we were talking about earlier, as well as the grant for the FCM grant for the asset management that I think we brought to council earlier this year. That's going to be happening in 2021. So that's that grant as well. The contracted services, that is also was the increase for that asset management program that we are getting the grant for. So that's the increased cost within the contracted services there.
Just for interest sake, would it be possible to get a list of all the grants that we are going to be receiving in 2021? Because I think our staff did an amazing job applying and getting grants, including $36 million.
I think it's
I'm
quite
sure
an
that
art
we can.
to be able to do the grants.
Yeah, well, and we maximize those possibilities, and that's credit to you guys, and it's a benefit to our taxpayers, so appreciate that.
Any other questions on engineering?
Nope, moving on, water.
Water. This is one of the areas we spoke earlier where it's actually offsetting taxation. If you look at the bottom line there, it's in a surplus situation. As far as the difference between the budgets, there really wasn't a lot that was changed. We do have, there was in, as far as the sales of goods and services, you'll see that has dropped a little bit there. It's a combination of, that 50,000 is a combination of two things. One is our bulk water sales have decreased dramatically since the good old days, if you like to put it that way. So we've really had to reduce that by 100,000. The offset of that is the increase for the operational side on the fees. But that has had an impact on the bulk water sales, has definitely had an impact on our water revenue. In the other column, the 29,000 is the amount from the asset management portion of the increase in the utility fees. And you'll see at the bottom that's going directly out to a reserve.
Any questions? Sewer?
This is one you can see where it actually basically add a cost recovery for operations and for a little bit of capital layaway as well. For sewer here, under the budget adjustments and the revenue next to sales, you see the 78,000, that is the adjustment for the fees for the operational side of sewer. And out in the other column, the 64,500 is the AMP increase to the utility rates going out to a reserve at the bottom. Apart from that, not really a lot of change for sewer.
Questions? Councillor Sorensen and then Councillor Byer.
The chair to administration, how close are we to cost recovery for sewer? Like this number looks like we're cost recovery.
For operations, we are achieving cost recovery.
Yes. But not necessarily for capital.
Not necessarily for capital, although I will say if you consider the work that's been done to consider the depreciation value of the wastewater treatment plants that we're recovering, on the whole, sewer is by far our best overall area in terms of approaching full cost recovery. Don't want to get nitpicky, there's still a little work to do there, but if all of our areas looked as good as sewer did, we would be in an exceptionally good shape, relatively speaking.
All right. Councillor Byer.
Sorry, my question has been answered.
All right. Anybody else? Moving on.
Waste collection. This is two items in here. Is the waste collection contract through GFL, so you see some inflationary adjustments for that. The other part that goes into this area here is the landfill reclamation, and the reason why I have it here instead of a landfill is that the landfill item is a cost shared item, but this part is not a cost shared item. So just to sort of separate those out. So the 135,000 you see at the bottom here, that is the landfill reclamation amount. We had to add, it used to sit at about 105,000 every year, but because of the reduced life of the landfill that we spoke about at the end of the year, end of the 19 year, we've had to add 30,000 to that for this year.
So we're switching contractors to waste management for waste collection.
I just bought them out.
I do have
What's that?
Waste collection is fully cost recovered now through the utility bills.
Councillor Byer.
Through the chair to administration, wouldn't that 135,000 go into a reserve for when we need to do the reclamation, or a separate bank account of some sort?
Through the chair to Councillor Byer, it goes to a liability account, so it's treated a little bit differently. It's not transferred to reserve, we have to expense it and to a liability account once we've actually done everything at the end of the year. It's treated just a little bit differently in the accounting sense.
So I came back too soon.
No, just over.
All right, anything else on waste collection? Moving on to landfill.
Sorry, for landfill, we raised the rates spec up to a sort of pre-fire revenue amount. We had dropped it down because of the fire there. And there was a...
2020's been a bad year, but at least our landfill wasn't on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure you've seen what's going on at Yellowwood County Transfer Station,
Oh,
so
that's horrible, yeah.
I don't know what's going on with society today, but
Too much time in their hand.
Feel free to fill us in.
After we're off the mic, I'll tell you that.
anything on landfill? Councillor Barr.
Through the chair to administration, I know it's been a weird year for our landfill. We've talked previously at committee of the whole meetings about adjusting our landfill fees. Is there anything reflected in this budget of that, or would that change be made after it's brought back to council?
Thank you, through the chair. Considering the size and scope and nature of that potential change, we felt it was more appropriate to deal with that independent of the budget discussion. So we are administratively preparing to bring back some significant adjustments to practices at the landfill, including fee adjustments. Council will see that most likely in early 2021. There may then be some budget adjustments that would come along with that. We would just suggest that should that be put in place, that they would be dealt with prior to the budget being finalized in the spring for the purposes of tax notices going out.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? I think everyone knows what I'm going to say.
Hours of operation.
As part of that report, are we going to look at hours of operation? That is my concern. That's one of the pieces of feedback I receive consistently, especially in the summertime, is being closed on Sundays and not having any Sunday openings during the summer. So
Yes,
I know, and I know Goodman has a different perspective on that, but
certainly, Mayor, I think that would be the appropriate time for that to be raised, and that administration is certainly will be prepared to answer questions or engage that conversation.
okay. Just a piece of feedback, as I've been thinking about this, I'd be even open to a Sunday surcharge fee for that, give it a test shot, just to help recover some of those costs for that convenience of having it open on Sunday, and see if people are willing to pay a little extra to have it open on Sunday. I know I would be as a user of that facility, but that may not be the way some people feel. So, Councillor Chouinard?
I feel comfortable making this comment. Even if we look at the amount of hours we're operating, where we're closed Mondays and most Tuesdays, even if we rotated the hours and we're closed during the summertime, Monday, Tuesday, even Wednesday, keep the same hours but rotate them. That way there's no extra cost. Other landfills do it, like where you mentioned the transfer stations.
We don't think
I don't think right now is the time
Okay,
to discuss
we'll move on.
landfill hours.
We'll get that report. We'll have a very
There will be a
in-depth
time
discussion on that.
Here, 5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saturday.
So let's move on.
Councillor Curry will have a differing comment on that. So
If you will put a surcharge on that Sunday,
I would
support
happily pay the surcharge myself. All right.
Moving on.
So let's move on
Recycling.
to sewer, that's more attractive than garbage. Oh, is that the next one?
Recycling. Really, there's just the incorporation of the new contract we have with the recycling depot. And as you can see, with the adjustment to the fees, we're now at a cost recovery for that.
Good work, everyone.
Very good.
Has lunch arrived?
I think it's approaching. I think we just have 2 small items
Things
left
for
in
Mitch?
Mr.
Okay.
Ham's section, and then it may be perfect time for us to
Awesome.
break for lunch there.
Okay.
I have snacks in my truck, it did run.
Planning overall, there wasn't a lot of change in the bottom line. Included in here is sorry, I just thought I had it right on my page, I have to turn it over. There were some carryover projects from 2020 that are coming over, the land use bylaw review, the aerial photos, OSL review, off-site levy review, all included in this budget for next year.
Councillor Byer and Councillor Sorensen.
Through the chair to administration, I know in these departments, we've had some staff changeover and mat leaves and things like that. How are we at with that and this budget and having the service levels that we are expecting?
So always in the budget, we reflect a fully staffed department. We do not yet know, mat leaves are now variable in terms of lengths of time. And so respective of, staff there, we're not sure exactly when those will expire, but what this budget does allow is for us to fully staff our planning department in 2021, whether that's by temporary support or return of staff that are on leave.
Councillor Sharp? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sorensen, then Councillor Sharp.
Through the chair to administration, I just want to clarify, I heard it correctly, you said the aerial photos are included. Where would they be?
That would be in the contracted services amount.
Thank you.
Councillor Sharp.
Where it says expensive personnel and contracted services, or some of the contracted services, that's some of our personnel? Or am I misreading this?
Personnel and contracted services each have their own line.
Okay, because I'm just looking at it, because in our personnel, our total personnel for that department is 270? Is that correct? Because I'm just counting the amount of bodies. I mean, yes, there's 2 off on mat leave, so contracted services, so none of our people working in the back are contracted services, or?
That's correct.
Okay, so contracts over and above for studies, et cetera. Okay, that clarifies that for me, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on to economic development.
Really, the only change was just the property beautification reserve just being changed to what is actually left in that reserve.
So I would add, just also not reflected in this is the shared economic development position with Community Futures, because it's being funded through to its completion in March already through the 2020 budget, but that is an additional activity that the town is engaged in economic development moving forward. You may also see some additional requests in relation to some of the regional economic development initiatives that have been undertaken. Unfortunately, we just didn't know costs at this stage that we felt comfortable placing them in the budget, but I anticipate that administration will be approaching council on some project-based work that would be asked to be considered.
Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Byer.
Through the chair, would that be like for the charging stations? Is that part and parcel of that for regional economic development?
So that is thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. That is one potential project-based item that may be considered, as well as we're working on some marketing and tourism-based efforts with our 4 or 5 of our regional partners that may also require some inputs as well, that we will be approaching council for consideration at the appropriate time.
Especially when our MLA got that appointment involving tourism. Could we just have an update on where we're going on the charging stations, or is that not appropriate at this time?
Mandy, I was going to say Mandy here. I'll just ask Mandy to give a brief update. I'm not sure that there's any changes since that last piece that was sent out, but Mandy, do you want to just anything to add to that was recently sent out?
We are going to be doing a status update on the coming up community.
Oh, perfect, thank you very much.
Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Teaser. There's just a little teaser there.
Perfect.
She knows how to work the crowd there. It's perfect.
And we have a letter that has been drafted that will be going out to various ministers as well to lobby their support to get some funding. So
I think suffice it to say for today that we are still actively moving that project forward and excited about how it's
I read
progressing.
somewhere where Tesla had funded big projects. So.
in Jasper, yeah. Councillor Byer.
I don't think I had my hand up.
Okay. Anybody else? I do think that we really need to maybe have a conversation at some point about doing something to highlight our bike park and marketing that, and putting some significant dollars towards some marketing opportunities, whether that's a big billboard someplace outside of the city, because I think that is a huge potential to draw people into our community.
Thank you. So we have had preliminary conversations. At this stage, they've happened mostly in Guy's world in terms of event-based highlighting of that asset, and I think obviously translating that into just general exposure and marketing is certainly on our radar. It is just an absolutely wonderful, stunning asset, and I commented, I think, to those who were present, as conceptually I knew and understood what we were doing, but honestly seeing it, it was just, honestly, the scope and scale of it was just so much grander than kind of what I had in my own mind, and we certainly want to make sure we maximize both the knowledge of our local residents of that great asset, but also obviously attracting and bringing people in. I suspect Wilmore Park is going to become, used to be easy to get a spot to camp in Wilmore Park. I suspect that is going to change.
But all the volunteers as well, like hours.
Full credit to all those involved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Land and subdivision.
No real change from 2020. We budgeted in here for 2 lot sales, but as you see down the bottom, it says the net taxation impact. Any money that we do generate from those sales goes straight to reserves. That's the end of infrastructure and planning's.
Building maintenance.
That belongs
Yes,
in
belongs
community
to the-
development.
Okay.
Community protective services.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll take a break for lunch. Oh,
Just
hang
before we
on.
do that, let's just maybe specify how long you want to be away.
We
Mayor?
will do
10
30 minutes. 30 minutes.
So then we'll start.
12:40.
12:40, 12:45?
12:40.
12:40, okay, thank you.
Is the mic on?
Mic off.